Welcome back to lesson 5.3. In this lesson, we're going to talk about inequalities in one triangle. So remember those inequality symbols, less than, greater than, or equal to. Just the definition of an inequality. For any real numbers A and B, A is greater than B if and only if there is a positive number C such that A equals B plus C. So what does that really mean? So here's an example. If 5 equals 2 plus 3, which we know is true, then we know that 5 is greater than 2, and 5 is also greater than 3. Now, sometimes people can get their inequality symbols mixed up, so over here I've kind of created a diagram of what goes through my mind when I think of or see those inequality symbols. I know that 5 is greater than 3, and if an alligator was gonna had a choice to eat 5 or 3, his mouth would always open up to the 5, the greater than number. So that's kind of how I always think of or keep my inequality signs straight. Just over here, just as a reminder that if my symbol looks like this, I would say it is less than. We know this is equal to, and we would call this greater than. All right, let's look at some properties of our inequalities of real numbers. Some of these have shown up before, so they shouldn't be new. We're just kind of adding that inequality symbol. Our comparison, A is less than B, A is equal to B, or A is greater than B. And those just come from what we just talked about right up here, just kind of showing the comparisons. The next one is the transitive property of inequality. And remember, we've actually used this for a few things before. We've used it for segments, we've used it for angles, and now we're going to use it for inequality. So if A is less than B and B is less than C, remember that B is kind of that connecting point, so then we can say A is less than C. So remember, we have that connection. All right, it is also kind of that law of syllogism as well, and then you can also use it for greater than. The next one is just the addition property, and again, we've used this one before. Remember, the addition property is when we add the same thing to both sides, so really we're keeping that equation the exact same. So if A is greater than B, then I also know that A plus C is greater than B plus C. And then you can also use that with less than. And then subtraction is very similar to addition. We're just subtracting the same thing from both sides, really keeping it the same equation. So if A is less than B, I also know that A minus C is less than B minus C. So we can use those in the rest of our lesson as well. So kind of keep on the lookout for those. We're going to talk about the exterior angle inequality. And remember, the exterior angle, the angle outside, we've used that before. And remember what we do know from the exterior angles theorem beforehand. We know that that measure of angle 1, the exterior angle, equals the measure of angle A plus the measure of angle B. So what does that mean in inequalities? The measure of an exterior angle of a triangle is greater than the measure of either of its corresponding remote interior angles. And remember what that remote interior angles mean. It means that the angles that are not adjacent to the exterior angle. So notice that angle C is actually adjacent to angle 1. So that would not be considered a remote interior angle if I'm looking at angle 1. So this theorem says that I know that the measure of angle 1 is greater than A, which is one of the remote interior angles, and is also greater than B. So we need to make sure we remember that. All right, let's look at some examples. using the exterior angles theorem. So we need to use the inequality theorem to list all angles whose measures are, and this is really important because this less than, it might be greater than, you just need to make sure you look. Less than the measure of angle 14. So here's some helpful hints that I think making sure I look for these types of angles in my problem. Look for an angle to be exterior and look for the remote interiors. Also look for congruent angles to those remote interior angles, and a lot of times those will be vertical angles, just to be on the lookout. And then also look for the transitive property. So I'm going to look at and kind of mark the measure of angle 14. And notice that's an exterior angle, and there's also two triangles. It is exterior too. So let's look at the blue triangle first that we just marked. Because of the exterior angles theorem, I know that 14, the measure of angle 14 is greater than the measure of angle 4. Notice that is one of those remote interior angles. And I also know it's a remote interior angle too. It is also the measure of angle 11. Alright, and then notice that 14 can also be considered an exterior angle to this triangle, the purple triangle. So I can also do that same kind of concept again. So the measure of angle 14 is greater than, notice angle 2 is one of those remote interior angles that it doesn't touch. And notice the other one is 3 plus 4, so I can also use the measure of angle 3 in there as well. Alright, so we've kind of used those remote or interior angles. Let's now look for maybe those congruent to any of these 4. One thing that I always like to look for is those vertical angles. So notice 11 and 9 are congruent. So if 14 is greater than 11, it would also be greater than 9 because of those vertical angles. And then we need to consider some of those other angles to be exterior angles as well. So notice 9 we can maybe consider to be an exterior angle. So let's look at 9 as an exterior angle, because if 9 is is less than 14 and 9 is greater than some of those angles, then 14 would be greater than 2. So if we said the measure of angle 9 is greater than 6 and 7, and 14 is actually greater than 9, we know that 6 and 7 are also included in this grouping too. So which angles is 14 greater than? We could say the measure of angle 4, measure of angle 11, and 9 because of those vertical angles. Since 9 is greater than 6 and 7, we can include those in there as well. And then we can also say the measure of angle 2 and the measure of angle 3. And this probably won't come to you right away, but you can just kind of take some steps and just keep looking for them. I think it'll get easier as you practice. Let's go to the next one. We are asked to find something that is greater than the measure of angle 5. So here's the measure of angle 5, and notice it is an interior angle. So any exterior angle to 5 would be considered greater than. So notice if I look at the measure of angle 5, I know the exterior angle to that would be considered angle 10. If everybody can see that, angle 10 would be that exterior angle. And also notice we can use this exterior angle because 5 would be considered its remote interior angle. So really looking for those exterior angles as well. right, so again, we're looking for those angles that are greater than. Well, using that transitive property, do I have any angles greater than the measure of angle 10? And let's see. Oh, I can see that 16 would be considered my exterior angle, so I could say the measure of angle 16 would also fit in that category. And that is because we can just take a note that the measure of angle 5 is less than the measure of angle 10. And the measure of angle 10 is less than the measure of angle 16. And notice how that transitive property can come into play. All right, another one that you may see, is there anything congruent to the measure of angle 10 that we could also consider 5 being less than? And you can notice that 10 and 12 are vertical angles, so 12 would also be considered in that grouping of greater than 5. And then is there anything that is greater than 12 that we just found? And notice we can say 15 and 12. Need to use a different color so we can see it stand out. 12 can be considered that remote interior angle to the measure of angle 15. So what angles do we have? We have 10 and 17. We have 16, 12, and 15. All right, if you will stop this video and go ahead and do your next checkpoint. After you get finished, you can start this video back up and check your answers. All right, here are the answers to your next 2 checkpoints. Again,